Since the latest chapters of Jujutsu Kaisen, there has been a massive shift in the battle against Ryomen Sukuna. With Gojo and Kashimo out of the picture, who will the world turn to now? There is only one person who could possibly hold back the King of Curses or even defeat him, and that is Yuji Itadori. Although so far in the series, we have been convinced that Yuji is nothing more than a cog in this giant machine. Akutami has secretly been cooking up something concerning our main protagonist. And funnily enough, this stems all the way from the first chapter of Jujutsu Kaisen. If we take a close look at Yuji in the first chapter, after having consumed the cursed finger, once Sukuna takes control, we notice how only one of his hands appears to show something odd. And now in the latest chapter, we see Yuji making his grand entrance into this decisive battle with Higuruma. However, we see him clutching onto his right hand. So what did we see from chapter 1 and the latest chapter that is so familiar? You've guessed it, claws. Huh? So what exactly are we trying to figure out? We've been through countless theories discussing the relation between Yuji and Sukuna, but it's finally time we try our best to break down what Yuji's cursed technique could be. I know it sounds like a far-fetched idea, but since it was revealed that Yuji can switch his soul into different bodies, this gives us leeway to get an idea of what Yuji might use against a full-form Sukuna. Before we go through the various outcomes of what Yuji could use against Sukuna, we need to highlight over something the King of Curses had mentioned in chapter 8 of the manga. Before opening his domain expansion, Sukuna would claim he will reveal what True Jujutsu is all about. So what does Sukuna mean by True Jujutsu? Since Akutami follows the laws of Buddhism in his universe, it would make sense to associate True Jujutsu to enlightenment. This theme of enlightenment is also mentioned by Kenjaku when he rambles on about this new world he wants to create and push everyone into nirvana, as he would say. But this level of enlightenment which Sukuna had reached is on a completely different scale to Gojo's Honored One moment. Gojo reached enlightenment for only a single moment against Toji, but for Sukuna he lives and breathes this sort of energy once he awakens his domain expansion. The same could also be said for when he used his cursed technique. But that doesn't really reveal much about True Jujutsu. I always saw it as most, if not all sorcerers, having this misconception that Jujutsu comes from negative emotions, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's more than that. Like negative emotions is just one branch of a tree, and the real core or roots of cursed energy comes from something other than despair. And once you acknowledge whatever feeling that is, you can reach new heights. This would be the state of enlightenment which I had just mentioned. I also believe that Sukuna, in his time spent getting stronger and perfecting his cursed technique, came upon that realization. He was enlightened, and his domain being able to form without a barrier, as though he were creating a masterpiece on air, is the direct result of that enlightenment, as his cursed energy manipulation and cursed technique usage were pushed to levels unknown. This sort of enlightenment can only be accessed if one can truly understand its concept. Gojo's state of enlightenment was only momentarily, and we don't really see another time in which he has that feeling again, but Sukuna understood its true concept in its purest form and can access True Jujutsu, and he can do this countless times because of that. This could also explain why Sukuna says that curses also don't know what True Jujutsu is, because the majority of them are formed through negative emotions, which, if my theory is correct, is not what the true core of Jujutsu stems from. It may also explain why Sukuna views himself apart from humans and curses. Perhaps after losing his human body and becoming a curse, the emotion he came from wasn't only negative like most curses, but whatever the core of Jujutsu is, allowing him to be significantly stronger than all the other curses before, giving him the title of King of Curses. This should better explain what my take on True Jujutsu is. Sukuna was molded from the core of Jujutsu, the purest form of cursed energy. He effortlessly expands his domain expansion out of thin air. It also makes you wonder why Gojo believes his students will surpass him. They will be the ones to awaken True Jujutsu. So currently the phases of this epic final battle has revealed the losses of both Gojo and Kashimo. Sukuna, now in his purest and truest form, would be in the state he gained after uncovering what True Jujutsu is, as well as realizing the form of his soul. Exactly what Mahito had gone through in his battle against Yuji and Todo in the Shibuya incident arc. But I believe with Yuji and Higuruma now entering the fight, Yuji will be the first sorcerer to master True Jujutsu. Yuji's origins and relation to Sukuna is still a mystery, but I have a really good feeling Yuji will also reach heights unknown in his battle against Sukuna. So on to the decisive question. what exactly is Yuji's Cursed Technique, and what are the claws we saw on him in the end of the latest chapter. Yuji's Cursed Technique isn't just one simple ability that we typically see from other sorcerers, but there are many layers to it. The first instance was in chapter 222, when Yuji switched bodies with Kusakabe. We would call this his soul swapping technique. Shoko would even tell Yuji that his body is more close to a cursed object than anything, due to him still being lathered in Sukuna's cursed energy. However, I don't think that is the case. Kenjaku created Yuji for a reason, and that was to force the world to turn into something completely different, or as he would say, nirvana. In this case, Yuji would be the greatest catalyst of this happening, or in other terms, he would be the most important cog in the machine. Anyways, back to the many layers of Yuji's Cursed Technique. So the first one would be the ability to switch souls. The soul in Jujutsu Kaisen would be the most important factor towards one's existence. We saw exactly how Mahito was able to destroy people with just a single touch. So Yuji had this strange ability where his punches directly hit one's soul. When he was fighting Mahito, his attacks were said to hit the soul directly, thus causing Mahito to be inflicted with very dangerous wounds. At the time, the explanation was that Yuji had another soul residing within him, and that would of course be Sukuna's soul, thus making him indirectly and subconsciously very adept to hurting the soul itself. At that time, the explanation seemed legit, because we had no other information regarding the power system, which could provide counter and conclusive evidence to why he was able to damage the soul. So we took the explanation for granted. However, by mentioning the other instances, and keeping in mind that as of one of the latest chapters, Yuji is able to do some kind of soul manipulation, we can conclude that maybe Yuji was always using his cursed technique, or more likely his cursed energy property. When Yuji faced Sukuna and Uraume at the end of chapter 215, he was heavily injured. However, after breaking out of the ice technique, it would seem that those heavy injuries had healed and left a scar, considering that Mahito, a soul manipulator, could heal himself just by altering the shape of his soul. My guess is that Yuji did the same, although not to the same extent as Mahito. Maybe the difference in effectiveness was because he's human and not a cursed spirit, so the degree to which he can heal himself through soul manipulation is limited, or maybe Yuji isn't that adept at using his own cursed technique at will, so healing completely was out of the question. There are many maybe scenarios, but what remains is that his healing capacity might just have been him manipulating the shape of his soul. So in other terms, Yuji having idol transfiguration is not out of the question. All this time he may have been using it subconsciously. So currently Yuji is now a cursed object of sorts. My theory around the creation of a cursed tool, object and weapon is that you have to imbue the tool, object and weapon itself with a soul. Since the soul is the blueprint of cursed technique, creating something inanimate with a cursed technique would also have to have the same blueprint. Thus for me, Yuji is a creature that has this affinity to touch souls, absorb souls, contain souls, and manipulate souls. A very easy way to establish those presumptions is how Yuji is the only creature that could contain Sukuna's soul. Again, I say contain and not house or just be a vessel for the King of Curses. Anyone can house a foreign soul, but not anyone can contain it. This little evidence leads me to believe that Yuji has those aspects that let him freely manipulate souls without a cursed technique. Why do I say that? Because in his fight with Higuruma, Yuji's cursed technique did not get confiscated, only his cursed energy. And if Yuji already had the soul manipulation cursed technique from the start, if the events which I mentioned are true, then soul manipulation should have been confiscated and not his cursed energy. And this is where I get back to Yuji's cursed energy property. If we go back to Hikari's fight with Kashimo, Akutami introduces us to a very new concept within the Jujutsu Kaisen power system. Cursed energy might have different properties, so why does someone have cursed energy property? That I can't answer with facts, however I can interpret how this new aspect works in Jujutsu Kaisen. For Hikari it's his very nature, while for Kashimo it's because of his cursed technique. We can even argue that Jogo also has a cursed energy property, since he could produce flames really easily without mentioning that he was using his cursed technique, although I would like to limit myself to the only individuals the author established that they had a cursed energy property, and also because those two are the only ones I can remember having cursed energy property, but I might have forgotten about the others. Kashimo has a cursed energy property of electricity, then I would like to believe that Yuji also has a cursed energy property, one that can freely affect souls. Adding to that fact that Higuruma did not confiscate a technique, but rather confiscated his cursed energy. And adding all the other instances mentioned above, and the new hint of soul switching, my conclusive evidence would be that Yuji does have a soul manipulation related cursed technique. while also having a cursed energy with the property that allows him to freely affect, absorb, contain, and manipulate his soul and other people's souls. And it is really not that far-fetched that a cursed energy property can produce effects that are very similar to a cursed technique. I mean, soul manipulation to alter someone's memories if certain harsh conditions are achieved is complex, but so is Kashimo's lightning strike. Both of those are very complex abilities, achieved not through channeling one's cursed technique, but by using one's cursed energy property effectively. So we've understood that Yuji's official cursed technique could be one which manipulates souls in various ways, just like Mahito. But we also know that Yuji consumed the death painting wombs, meaning due to his soul manipulation, he also absorbs the death painting womb's cursed techniques. The following are the possible cursed techniques which Yuji may have gained after consuming the death painting wombs. Number 1, decay. Number 2, bone manipulation. Number 3, creating insects. Number 4, producing chemicals. Number 5, controlling body parts even when detached. Number 6, disintegration or ash manipulation. These are just headcanon cursed techniques, but it's also a gateway to why we see Yuji having claws. The claws would be Yuji slowly integrating into his true unbridled soul after consuming the death painting wombs, as well as his cursed energy property of soul manipulation working overtime. This idea of Yuji storing others' cursed techniques through consumption of one's soul is also related to Sukuna's black box technique. Now, if the theory of Yuji being Sukuna's twin is correct, then Sukuna isn't the only one who can use a black box technique, but so can Yuji. This again opens another gateway to Yuji potentially having acquired the various cursed techniques that Sukuna also had stored, as well as having his very own domain expansion. So then, what exactly are these claws of Yuji's? Like I just mentioned, I think that it's only a single piece to the puzzle. Yuji is slowly accessing his true form, and that would enable him to use true jujutsu. But as for these claws, I'll call them the claws of Calamity. Maybe it allows Yuji to destroy things in his way in just a single sweep. Exactly how we saw Sukuna use these claws in the first few chapters of JJK. But right now we are witnessing a monster in the making, and that would solidify Yuji as the demon god. If we are correct with this theory, then it further solidifies the idea that Yuji is indeed Sukuna's twin. This theory couldn't have been made possible without the help of Quirky Data 3500. I'll leave the link to his Reddit theory down below. So what do you think Yuji's final form could be, and what is his cursed technique? Be sure to let me know down below. As always, like this video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one.